Okay, everybody, welcome to the program. This is the Other People Show. I'm Brad Listi. This is my show. Thank you for being here. I appreciate it. And I hope you're doing all right. Hope you're hanging in. Hope you're hanging on. White knuckling. Reality. My guest today is Sarah Chihaya. She has a new memoir out called Bibliophobia. It is available from Random House. Bibliophobia is a book about books and reading. It's about the love of books and the fear of books. It's about family and friends, and it is about Sarah's struggles with her mental health and how those struggles, at least in part, set her on her course to write this book. It is a beautiful and powerful memoir that will make you think about why you read books, and in particular, it will make you think about the books that you have read that have had the biggest and most lasting impact upon you. It was really wonderful to meet Sarah Chihaya. Bibliophobia is the official March pick of the Otherppl Book Club. That is my book club. If you would like to join my book club, get a new book delivered to your door every 30 days. I pick the books. I interview book club authors on this show. If you want to sign up, just go to this podcast's official website, otherppl.com. Don't forget to subscribe to this show wherever you listen. Hit that subscribe button. You can also subscribe on YouTube. Follow me on social media to keep up with all the latest, Instagram and Bluesky. Check out my weekly newsletter over at Substack, bradlisti.substack.com. Sign up for it. I will email you once a week with the latest episodes of this show. I also share a list of links to things that I've been reading and finding interesting. So if that sounds good, sign up for my newsletter over at Substack. A reminder as well that I have a new company in the works, a new venture. It is called Deep Dive, and it specializes in the creation of long-form educational audio. I've been talking about this. I'm very excited about it. I am in post-production on the very first Deep Dive course. It is called How to Write a Novel, and it will feature more than 50 hours of never-before-heard conversations with dozens of today's leading writers. So it's imminent. It's coming. I'm in post-production, and I'm working hard. And stay tuned. If you want to check out Deep Dive on the internet, the website is www.deepdive.audio, and you can follow Deep Dive on Bluesky and Instagram. I also want to make note of a new series that I've been doing over the past couple of weeks. It is called Character Studies. New episodes of Character Studies air on Sundays, and they feature me in conversation with civilians. I've been interviewing ordinary human beings about their lives for this new series, and the interviews are anonymous. It's first name only, and the person I'm talking with has nothing to promote. They're just talking with me, and we're trying to connect. So check that out if you haven't already. Character Studies episodes on most Sundays. Maybe not every Sunday, but most Sundays. And if you know anybody who would be a great guest for Character Studies, please email me at letters@otherppl.com. The continuance of this series is entirely predicated on my ability to book good guests and to have good conversations. That's always been the challenge for a series like this. It's something that I've wanted to do for a long time, and I hope you will help me keep it going. So email me, letters@otherppl.com, if you know someone who would be a good guest. All right, so my guest today is Sarah Chihaya. Her new memoir is called Bibliophobia, and it is available from Random House. Bibliophobia is the official March pick of the Otherppl Book Club. Sarah Chihaya is a book critic, essayist, and editor, in addition to being an author. Her work has appeared in The New Yorker magazine, the New York Review of Books, The Nation, New York Magazine, The Atlantic, and the Yale Review, among other publications. She is the co-author of the Ferrante Letters, an experiment in collective criticism. She has taught at a variety of universities, including Princeton, NYU, and UC Berkeley, and she is currently a contributing editor at the Los Angeles Review of Books. I am very pleased to welcome Sarah Chihaya onto this show for the first time, and I'm very pleased to be featuring Bibliophobia as the official March pick for the book club. So let's get to the conversation. Here I am talking with Sarah Chihaya.
I did have to write it, and I was kind of in denial about that for a while. I think I was trying to write other books. I was trying to write this academic monograph that never went anywhere. That I guess I did write it, but it's like no one's ever going to see it. It'll never see the light of day. And I think that I was trying to do a lot of the work of like trying to figure out how to relate to books on my own, like without writing through it, just mentally. And that was just making me crazier in some ways. Like I was trying to do the work of being a scholar and writing a monograph and teaching and talking to people about literature, but I was in the middle of this sort of war with myself about if I believed everything I was saying and if I really understood how I related to books anymore. And so I had to, I think, write through it to be able to understand that why books are so important to me, why I think that books are so important in the world. But it's not something that I totally wanted to do. In fact, when I sold this book to my editor, I thought I was in denial for a long time, and I thought for the first year or so that it would be like a sort of popular critical book of essays or something about, that was really taking like an intellectualized view of like why we have this culture that's risen around books, and also like certain books in my life that have made me like come to this realization that books are both good, sort of good for the soul and like necessarily challenge the soul. And I think that it was like it would have been impossible to write that really intellectual book for me. I think someone else could do it. I think there could be an academic version of this book, of the sort of argument that we need books to be both good and to sort of push us or hurt us. But it was not, I had to, in order to get to wherever I am now, to like another phase of my career, like I had to write through this problem.
You had to like clear the decks.
Yeah. Yeah, that's actually the metaphor. This is the metaphor that I always have in my mind. Is like someday I will clear off my desk. Like I always picture my desk in my old office at Princeton, and it's like covered in stuff. And I'm like, someday it'll be clean. It never is.
I don't understand those people who have like I'm a pretty clean person, but the people who have like the pristine desk with just like one pen.
Oh yeah,
Eh,
I mean,
yeah.
I'm actually like very like hyper clean, but like I'm really a mess at my desk. Like I need just have everything. I need, if I'm writing about a book, I need to see everything in front of me physically. Like I can't even read on a screen. Like I need to have the actual book and every other book the author has written, and like notes and diagrams and like weird stuff.
So I want to read a quote. Sadness and reading, self-harm and writing are the violent lifelong habits that made me who I am. For me, being a depressed person and being a reader writer are knotted up in each other all the way back to the beginning. So, again, this memoir of yours opens with you having a mental health crisis and being hospitalized and I think diagnosed with major depressive disorder. Is that what it
Mhm.
is?
Oh yeah, it was. I think my diagnoses were major depressive disorder, OCD, and bulimia.
So it was a pretty serious situation, but you talk about how all of this stuff is bound up with reading all the way back to the beginning. You touched on just a minute ago the fact that you have been reading, since you were little, kind of obsessively. Can you just talk a little bit about why that is?
Sure. I mean, I think I read a lot the same way that a lot of us do. Like a lot of people read as children in an attempt to just get away from like your life, whether that is, people most frequently, especially in these bibliomemoirs that are like really positive, they talk about reading as a sort of magical escape or reading as a way to like travel to another land. And it was that, but it was also a way, I've come to realize that it was a way of not just going to a place, but shutting out the place that I was in. So it's not, it's not conventional escapism in the way that we usually talk about it. I think it was more of a kind of wanting to vacate like my particular situation or my body, not be in my family home anymore, not be who I was. And reading was a way to be somewhere else, and to not necessarily be someone else, but to be somewhere else.
So you were raised in Ohio
Mhm.
primarily, and
Yeah.
you write about how your father's mercurial temperament could be difficult to live with. Like that was like when you talk about wanting to escape and being in the family home and maybe not wanting to be there, it was because of that. It was because of the tension in the house that was brought on by his moods.
Yeah, there was a feeling of tension all the time. And, I've thought about it a lot in many years since I've lived in my parents' house. And I think that it was because of the relationships that we had between each other. And also, I think my dad was like a very lonely man, and that caused a lot of tension for all of us. Like it put a lot of pressure on the people in the family to do what we could to like make him feel better. And I don't know, just that feeling of pressure was like ever present in my life until I left living at home. And I don't think I realized it when it was happening. Like I didn't know what I was doing with books, or I didn't know that I felt this pressure until it was alleviated, until I was like living like in college. Probably I was on my own, and it felt different to be somewhere else. I felt like I could be someone else somewhere else, if that makes sense.
So the loneliness that your father felt, be it was because of the fact that he had left Japan and had left his family and was kind of on his own, or was there something else? Like, was it the alienation of being in the diaspora, or was it, like, work related?
I think there was a combination of things. I think I read about this in the book. Like I can't totally remember, but he was estranged from his parents for many years and didn't have a relationship really with the family in Japan for a long time after he left, because he left. And so I think he was lonely in that way. And I think that, like a lot of parents, I think that he wanted to be loved in a way that we cannot love him. I don't know. Not being a parent, I feel like that's maybe a lot of substance about people with kids, but I think that that's the cause of so much alienation between parents and kids. Parents want to be loved in a certain way that they wish maybe their parent could love them, and their child just can't love them the right way. Or there's some expectation
What did he
that
want? I'm curious to know, like, you think he wanted to, like, be, like, fawned over, or what was it?
I think that he wanted. Well, my parents lived in suburban Ohio, like one of these places with like developments and big lots and like people who are far apart. We moved there we moved from Toronto originally. That's where my parents met. And he had this community there of like Japanese guys who also came over in the 60s. And then we moved first to Montreal, and that's where I was born. And we had this sort of existence there that was like kind of, he was still sort of working with friends and like working at a company. And I don't know, it's this kind of experimental time to like try out, like living in the outskirts of Montreal. It was like this very foreign, to him, I imagine, to everyone, this very foreign setting with like horses. And it was the real sticks then. It was like really the country, like as soon as he left Montreal. And then we moved from there. So he had, we had like there were horses and like people who were involved in the horses. There's this whole sort of community. And then we moved to Shaker Heights outside of Cleveland, where he still like had friends and our neighbors. Like it was an older suburb, like designed to be very close together. And so there was a lot of sort of neighborhood cohesion. And then we moved from there out to like the real suburbs, like real space, and you don't really, unless you make an effort, like know your neighbors and people who are less sort of politically inclined, like politically minded, like my parents, and less diverse, and the no Japanese community. And I think that my dad kind of thought he was like a lone wolf, like a lot of men of his generation, but he wasn't. Like, I think he really needed that companionship and friendship that he had had in other places before. And because it was not available, he also started working from home. So he was like very isolated
What
in
did he
this.
do?
He worked for a Japanese company. So he was like on the phone with Japan at night a lot. But during the day, he was kind of at loose ends. He was like waiting for his workday to start, like when we were doing stuff. And so he was, I think, like, I don't know. I think he wanted a friend. I think. I don't know. I think that I was not ready to. I was too young to be a friend to him, and also like, who wants to be friends with like a sullen teenage girl? I was like not in the place to offer him the kind of companionship that I think he maybe himself did not know he needed.
Well, I don't think it's the role of the daughter to be her dad's buddy. I mean, I guess there's a friendship inherent in a good parent-child relationship. There's some level of that, but it's not exactly a friendship when it works well, in my experience, right? Like
Mhm.
he's your dad and you're his daughter.
Yeah. And I don't think that he would have identified it as like needing to be my friend. But when I think about it now, he died last spring. So, like, when I think about now, like the relationship that we had, I think that would have would have not necessarily recognized that he was lonely, but I can recognize that in him now, I think. I don't know, I don't want to put words to his feelings, but that's sort of what it seems like to me now. And so I felt this great pressure to like fill a void, to make him happy, to keep everyone in my family happy. I think all of us felt that because there was this kind of loneliness at the core.
How many people were in your family
My mom and I have an older brother who left the house to go to college when I was 7.
when you were 7? Okay, and your mom, like, with respect to your dad's, like, loneliness and maybe feelings of isolation, like, what was she doing as you were growing up? Like, how did she manage that?
I mean, I think it was a lot of pressure on her too, like as the person who knew him best and chose him as the person she loved. She said she worked also full time, so my dad was alone a lot. Like when he was at home, like working from home, when he wasn't working, he was just there alone. When I was like at school and my mom was at work, so I don't know. I think there must have been a lot of hours in every day when he was like working, but also kind of not working because everyone in Japan was asleep. Where he was like waiting for us to get home, or waiting for his workday to start, or waiting for something. And I don't really know what he did in that time. But yeah, I think that my mother did a lot of like the emotional heavy lifting in the house to like make things run. And she's very supportive. Like she actually is very supportive of this book, which I was very glad about because I was afraid. Sort of when I started writing, as anyone is afraid when I start reading about the family, like what's going to happen. But I think that she also did her best to like bear a certain amount of pressure from my dad to like be his companion and to like make everything better for both of us. I don't know. I think it was really hard for her. I ask her about it sometimes, but it's sort of hard to get at. Like it, and especially because my dad passed away so recently, it's been hard to like excavate those feelings with her.
Yeah, you write about him, he had, dementia,
He had Alzheimer's.
Alzheimer's, yeah, and when you talk about him, like, feeling this pressure as a child in the household to make him happy, like, what were the ways that you understood as a kid that he could be made happy?
I think, children, have these sort of simplistic ways of thinking, like, well, if I do this or if I do that, like if I do these proactive things, if I like smile more, if I do well on this test, like you think that it's a, I mean, it's a very transactional way of thinking. You know, like kids think that if you do the right things, you can fix someone or like fix a situation. And so I thought a lot that if I did the right thing, you know, like if I was good at school, like if I was just good at the things that were important to him, like running or sports, or math or whatever, like I would make him happy. But in retrospect, I think that, you know, I put so much pressure on myself to like do active things that would make him happy, but like none of the things that I did, I think would have made him necessarily like happier in the long term. Like they might have on a day-to-day level like kept things under control or like made him happy for the moment. But I think that, you know, I think a lot about how like he was also someone with depression. Like he never had it treated because in our culture, I guess it is like not a thing, especially like of that generation. Like he was really not a big believer in mental health, especially for Japanese people. He was like I think therapy was like a thing that white people did sometimes, and he didn't know why. And you know, I brought it up with him later in life, and he admitted later that like maybe it could have helped him at a certain point, but he thought it was too late for him by the time that like I started therapy and stuff when I was older. So I think that he just didn't know any other way to be. And I thought that I could fix him as a child by doing things correctly, but that's not always possible.
So as a kid, I guess it's like fair to say that you sensed your father's depression.
Yeah, and you know, thinking back, like I think that he was giving clues in some ways. Like he was not like cries for help, but like kind of in some ways, yes. Like I can see patterns in his behavior that I never recognize are the patterns of like a depressed person, you know, of it doesn't exhibit exactly the same way that like my depression does, but we have like similar sort of like I will sometimes find myself in a position where I'm like where I don't want to do anything, like nothing will make me happy. You know, like everyone feels this sometimes. Like no matter what my partner does or my friends do to like try and like bring me out of it, I will just want to retreat into myself. And my dad, I think, frequently exhibited that. We just didn't know, we couldn't recognize it or didn't know how to help him or like what to do.
That's sweet. I mean, it's heartbreaking, but there's a sweetness to it, like a young child, like just trying to make her dad happy. And I think too, like these things do often get passed down through the generations.
Hmm.
And how could it, I mean, almost how could it not? Like I'm thinking about just the ways in which you might have internalized this without necessarily having a language to define it for yourself as a kid. Uh, like that makes a certain sense to me. And then it also makes sense to me that you would be reading so voraciously. And one of the things that I loved about your book is the way that it made me consider why I read. And
Mm.
like why like there are people who are book people, right? There are people who write, there are people who read. You know, in contemporary culture, I'm not sure what percentage of the population it would be. I don't think it's necessarily huge, you know, in terms of people who really read. Like I think, you know, there's the person who reads like 1 or 2 novels a year, and then there's the person who reads like a novel a week or
Hmm.
a book a week, and the latter is what I'm referring to. And I was thinking to myself, you know, I'm often reading, I guess sometimes for escape or for like engagement in some other like reality, some other consciousness. I think there's also a part of me that's like, like I need the instructions. Like, what are the instructions? Like that sort of impulse. And you were talking about reading as a way of I think maybe escaping or even like disappearing, like
Mhm.
not being yourself. Are there other reasons that you can locate for why you took to reading with, I think you called it vicious desperation?
Yeah. I think that, my other reasons for reading are more conventional, perhaps. Like, they're more like why I mean, I'm first of all, I'm very glad to hear you say that this book made you think about why you read, because I wrote it mainly because I'm kind of nosy. I really like to know what people are reading, why they're reading. I used to ask my students all the time, like, what they felt or thought about what we were reading together. And so the purpose of, when I was writing this book, I was thinking about how I was very reluctant to write a memoir, but instead, like, the way that my editor kind of tricked me into it was to be like, well, what would you like this book to do? And how can we get there? And I would like the book to ask people these exact questions, like, why do you read? Like, what draws you to certain books at certain times? Like, why do you need reading, or why does reading have to be more than just positive, like purely positive entertainment? And I think that, my answers have to do with all those things. Like, I read for entertainment, like for like passing the time and knowing what happens and all this the stuff that's familiar to us. But also, like, reading, I think, can give us a kind of insight into how other people see worlds. And I mean, the way you said you're looking for instruction sometimes, I think that I was looking for something similar. Like, if I was reading to disappear or to not be myself, um, that implies that I was kind of looking for how to be someone else or how to be something else. And I think that reading can offer insight into how else to be sometimes.
So there were two imaginary texts that I think drove, as you describe it, drove your reading as a child. The first was a book that, if you could find it, would sort of tell you everything about the world. It would be like the key that unlocks the door and
Mhm.
answers all of your questions and tells you where your place in the world is. And the second was like the story of your own life, which you were pretty clear was going to be like a short and tragic story.
Yes, yeah.
So you were searching for those as a kid.
I mean, I think that I was always looking as one. When I think back on it now, I think it's pretty clear that I was looking as one to be in opposition to the other. Like, if I already had with me the story of my life, which I thought was going to end in violence, and quickly, I was looking for something to counteract that violence. Like, I was looking for something that would save me. I was looking for that book that would, as you said, unlock the key and like make me realize why I should stay, or like what else there was, or something that would show me something. And I think I'm still looking for that book. I think everyone's looking for that book.
I'm looking for it. Tell me if you find it.
Well,
I also have to mention this term that you use in the book to describe the books that you read that had a really powerful impact on you. You call them life ruiners.
yeah.
And I think some of the books that I think fall into this category for you at different stages of your life, uh, would Anne of Green Gables qualify as a life ruiner, or
Well,
is it?
Anna Gables is actually a pre-life runner. It was like, I think in some ways it like primed me for that experience, because it taught me about attachment to books. Like, I'd never been attached in this personal way to books the way that I was attached to the Anne books. It taught me that you could have like a really deeply personal relationship to literature.
What was it about Anne of Green Gables? This is the series written by Lucy Maud Montgomery.
Mhm.
I've not read Anne of Green Gables, but it's a beloved series. It's sold a
Yeah.
cajillion copies. It's very big in Japan, as you write about,
Mhm.
which I found fascinating. But can you
Yeah,
just
it's
talk?
really weird.
Yeah, talk about like Anne of Green Gables and why it resonated with you.
I think that Anne of Green Gables, for me, there are a couple of reasons why I was drawn to it, or I was sort of fated to love it. So I'm Canadian, and it's a very Canadian story. Like Ella Montgomery is a great Canadian, and so my grandmother in Canada thought it's the person who sent me the first book, and she had thought, well, all kids read, the Anne books because that's what children do in Canada. And so it felt like a kind of connection to, to my past, like to my family and to our history when we moved to the States. And I felt sort of, I grew up in the States, but my parents were very clear about the fact that we were Canadian, not American. Like it was the worst thing to be like American. Like if you did something bad, it was like, oh, Americans do that. And so, Anne was a way to feel like I knew what I would be like if I'd grown up in Canada. I sort of had this alternate world in my mind of like what Canada must be like, or I would be better if I had grown up there or something. They're also just like really enchanting books for kids. Like they're or for a certain kind of child. The same girl who might have liked Little Women as I did, like a couple of years later, or in America. They're like really immersive. They're magical, because it happens in this sort of. So Montgomery was writing in the 40s, but she was writing in the sort of 1900s to 1940s, and she was writing about the time of her childhood, not her actual childhood, because she actually had a very sad, dramatic life. But she was writing about this kind of idealized time on an idealized Prince Edward Island in Queen Victoria's reign. So this Victorian era,
And
um,
wait, it was Prince Edward Island?
yeah,
Okay.
this kind of Victorian era nostalgic, like a lot of nostalgic texts, like kind of it never really existed, but kind of did in her imagination. And so it was like very enchanting to me. I think this very foreign place and this different time, and it was my first experience really of getting involved in historical fiction. There's something, in that sort of fantasy of like what this other time is like that I found very magical.
Transporting.
Yeah.
And then, so what was the first life ruiner that you
So the
read?
first life runner was Toni Morrison's The Blue Sky, and I read it when I was probably 15 or 16. Like at some point, I don't remember, in 10th or 11th grade, like at some point in school, which seems crazy to like I can't imagine how hard it must be to teach that book to high school students. Like I really can't picture it. But I read it in class, and it just changed the way that I thought that literature could work on you, or the kinds of things that books could do to you. It I think just I would not have been able to put words to this then, but like the craft of it is incredible. Like I'd never read anyone like Morrison before, and it was just such a shock to the system to read. I was always a voracious reader of like fantasy novels, and I read a lot of mass market paperbacks in that time, and I read a lot, but I had not really read anything like Morrison before. I'd not read anything that challenged me intellectually, but was also beautiful and disturbing and frightening and all these things. And I just didn't know. I didn't know that books could do that to you. I think I'd just been reading stories until then. Even the Anne books, they were like stories, and with Morrison, I was reading something that was more than a story, something that was a story, but also, a period that I didn't know about. It also takes place in Lorain, Ohio, which is very close to where I grew up. So it it felt very close. If the Anne books felt like comfortingly far, the Morrison felt very close, which makes no sense because and on one hand, like the characters are like living in the depression, and had nothing in common with the character that Morrison writes about. um and it feels sort of self-aggrandizing to be like, well, I identified with these characters, but I felt like a kind of commonality. It also it addressed topics I didn't know that I'd been thinking about, or I didn't know I'd been experiencing, like, like the roles of whiteness and race in our understanding of beauty that affects all children, that everyone growing up in this country. I never really had anyone put pressure on that idea before. Like, there were a lot of ideas that I think had been latent that the book drew out.
That's well said. And you write about you went to Princeton.
I went to Yale as an
Oh,
undergrad.
but you were
I
teaching at Princeton.
I taught at Princeton.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, but that's where Toni Morrison for many years
Yes.
was an instructor, and her presence kind of loomed large, and her legend sort of loomed large, obviously at that place. And there's a funny scene in the book where I want to say you're jogging
Yeah.
past the house where I think she had formerly lived, or no, was she living there when you jogged
Well, she
past
had
it?
moved away when around the time that I moved there. She had already gone.
Okay, but you were talking about, I think, a friend who had, walked past or something when she was living there and claimed to have seen that Project Runway
Yes.
was on her
Yeah.
television. I love that visual.
Yes, I like to believe that's true.
Well, I couldn't help as I was reading that section of the book about life ruiners and about the bluest eye. I was imagining you for whatever reason. I was imagining you in like a signing line at a Toni Morrison like, book event, and you going up to her and just being like, "Tony, this, the bluest eye ruined my life." I think she would love that. I think that's like such a high compliment in a
I hope
funny
so.
way.
I mean, it is the highest compliment, and, I hope that no one is confused, like, this is a good thing. Like, the Red Life Ruiner is experience that I hope everyone who loves reading has sometime. I think that, like, most of us have, where it's funny, I was on another podcast and the person was like, "Did you know that the ruination is a bad thing? Like, ruin is a bad word." And I was like, "Well, I mean, it's sort of tongue in cheek, right? You it ruins your life in a way that it has to be ruined. Like, so that you're emotionally kind of drained by it and exhilarated by it at the same time. There's something it's ruining in the sense that it takes everything you thought you knew and tells you that there's more that you didn't know. It's a necessary kind of ruining. And so, when I talk about life ruiners, I that is a term that I sort of reserve for the books that have impacted me the most in ways that I wasn't always ready to be, but that were totally necessary to the way that I I became the person I am. Like, I hope that she would be happy to know that she had written a book that, well, I mean, I hope you know that she wrote so many books that are so powerful to so many people, and for whatever reason, just whatever fates put that book in my hands, like, that is the book that sort of opened my eyes to. I think without it, I would probably not be a writer now.
I think that reading books like that have that powerful of an effect, that's what I'm dying for that. It's not necessarily easy to find. Like for me, it's like I read a lot of books, obviously, considering what I do, and I like a lot of them, but like I like most of them even. But I think that like the books of the kind that we're talking about, the ones that just like leave you thunderstruck and like fundamentally reordered, that seems like it should be rare. Like if that was happening with every book you read or every other book you read, like
Right.
either you've got impeccable taste and a lot of good fortune, or like, you're too easily impacted. But
Life would also be very hard,
yeah,
like, if you were constantly being moved, like, incredibly by everything that you encountered. I think you're right, I think it is a rare thing. I did an interview with the New York Review of Books a couple of years ago, or a number of years ago now, where I said that I was always looking for a book that would devastate me, like, that's what I'm looking for, and it doesn't always come, but, like, I'm always ready for it, like, or I think I am, I don't know. I'm, like, always waiting for that next book that will come along and kind of ruin me a little bit.
yeah. So bibliophilia, which is something that I think it's fair to say you have, like you're like a voracious reader and somebody who's sort of addicted to books. and then bibliophobia. Like those are two real things. Like I think maybe some people listening might be like, "Well, is bibliophobia like that's just the name of the book?" But bibliophobia is like an actual clinical diagnosis, right?
It is a real thing. Yeah, I think, well, anything can be a phobia, right? You can be afraid of anything. There's like in a technical way, it's like the fear of books, like actually being afraid of books. If you look at Instagram under the tag bibliophobia, there's like lots of sort of cheeky memes about like bibliophiles actually being afraid of like running out of books, or like, so there are all these different sort of popular memes that people put on it, but technically it is the fear of books. Yes.
And you experienced some variation of this as you were feeling like pressure to write, what is it called, a monograph, like an academic, like you have to an academic publication that would have led you to getting tenure as a professor, correct?
Yeah. Well, I think I've felt it acutely in this sort of clinical way a couple of times. I was like very afraid. I lived on the West Coast for a long time. I went to grad school at Berkeley. And I write about this in the book a bit, but this idea came from the time like when I was living there, and we had a year we had a lot of earthquakes. We had, like 3 earthquakes in one year. And being from the Midwest, this was like very shocking to me. And my boyfriend at the time was from San Jose and was like very blasé about these things. But I was like really terrified that I had all these bookshelves in my apartment that were just everywhere. There's like nowhere to run in the event of a major earthquake without being smashed by a bookcase. And so I was like very afraid that I would be actually literally killed by my books. Um, so there's that. But I also, yeah, when I was trying to write my academic book for to get tenure at Princeton, I was sort of struck by this fear that everything I wrote would be wrong, like, which I think is common to a lot of academics, and a lot of people trying to do that kind of project will be familiar with this fear. I suspect that someone's already written it, or someone could write it better, or you're not being responsible enough in reading all of the research and like doing everything you could do. And so what you come up with, like every word you put on the page, could always be better. And it sort of stymied me. It like stopped me from being able to do it.
And this book, I mean, among other things, but it is kind of the story of how you kind of came to terms with the fact that like a career in academia is not for you, or has that rejuvenated itself?
It is complicated. So I didn't get tenure. I didn't write the book that I was supposed to write to save my job. So that basically means that I was fired. And so in some ways, like, academia has closed its doors to me, whether I want that to be closed or not. And there are some things that I really miss about it. Like, I really miss teaching. I love teaching, and I hope I get to do it again. And I really miss having students. On the other hand, I think that it was a conscious choice that I've. It's funny because I was just talking in therapy about how like I have made a lot of choices that feel that I have been able to reconcile to myself as like things that happened to me, or like things that I sort of passively allowed to happen, but actually I've been quite active in like refusing to do certain things. So like I failed to write the academic book, but also maybe I refused to write the academic book because I knew it was the wrong book for me to write. And that applies to my family as well. Like, I failed to do certain things that would have made me a dutiful daughter, but maybe I refused to do them for better for worse. And so I think that I had also made my mind up. I can't blame this all on academia. Like, I'd also made my mind up that it was not the right kind of writing that I wanted to be doing or had to be doing. It was not the right setting for me to do it in. And so, I think that it's like a double-edged sword. Like, I don't know. It's sort of that I'm disallowed, but also that I have chosen this path for myself.
And the path is to be an author of books. like
Yeah.
the memoir and then potentially maybe a novel down the road or something like that?
Yeah, I think part of it was that I wanted to write for a broader audience. Like a lot of it's very hard to be an academic and do all the things you're supposed to do, like balance sort of being a writer for people in the profession, for other scholars, and do the kind of professional writing that is required of you, and to also write for the public. Like some people manage to do both, but I like maybe didn't have it in me. And so I've from the very beginning I've like wanted to write for a broader public, like for anyone who wants to read it. You know, anyone who's interested in books the way that I am, or if I do write a novel in the future, like anyone who just wants to read more by writing and is like not a professional. And so I think part of that choice of leaving academia was to say that I wanted to write for an audience of whoever those willing readers would be. You know, like not just people in the profession, like not just professional texts.
It's so hard to write a book that to have to write a book that you really don't wanna write sounds hellish to me. Like, it's hard enough. It's hard enough to write a book, but then to have to, like, write a book out of some sense of professional obligation or I couldn't, I would have a hard time as well doing that.
I think it's like great joy to many of my friends and former colleagues. You know, like I think that's another sign that I was like not cut out for the profession. Like it didn't it would some parts of the job could be great joy, like teaching and going to conferences and like talking to other colleagues and brainstorming with them, like that all. I've always had this kind of like desire to be in the mix, like sort of socially engaged and collaboratively engaged. But I've never really had the desire to just single handedly like take on a study and like go at it. And I think it's a lot of people do. And, you know, there were lots of times that I cursed myself for like not having that desire, like not being excited by what I was doing. But for whatever reason, it was just not right for me. I think it was not the thing that I should have been doing.
So, Bibliophobia, as I experienced it as a reader, felt to me like a book that was filled with all of this urgency. It is a book that felt like it had been written, like, at the end of a long process, and by that I mean, like, your entire life to the point at which you started writing it. It feels like you poured all of yourself and your experiences and the essence of who you were and are into this book. It's also a book that deals with very difficult subject matter, very personal book. It's a book that requires you to go into difficult times in your life and to relive them in a sense. Like
Hmm.
this is, I think, often what memoir requires of us. And it can be painful to do that kind of writing. And it can be scary too, because you're writing this thing with the aim of publishing it and sharing it with a general readership. Can you talk about navigating that part of the process?
Yeah, I think that's in some ways like why I was reluctant to write a memoir in the first place. Like I was in denial about the fact that it would be a memoir for a long time because I didn't want to write about my family, and you know, I didn't want to put words in anyone's mouth. I didn't want to presume to think that I knew what anyone else was thinking. And I didn't want to do that revisitation. Like I didn't want to. I knew I wanted to write about being hospitalized and that time in some way, but I didn't. I think when I signed up for it, I didn't know what I was signing up for. I didn't. I thought somehow that I could write about it from an intellectual remove, like not put myself back in my shoes from 2019. And and as I continued writing it, it became very clear that it would to give like a real honest rendering, it would require like going back into myself from in some moments I didn't want to think about. You know, the the chapter about Ruth Ozeki is like very. was very hard for me to write. I had to write it probably 5 times because
Can you describe that chapter just like kind of in a nutshell so people
sure,
can have an idea of what the terrain is?
yeah, in that chapter, I mean, I talk about the novel and I talk about my family and I talk about sort of
And just
being
I'm sorry to interrupt, but you're talking about The Tale of Time Being,
yes, yes, yes.
The Ruth Ozeki novel.
Mhm. Um, and that novel brought up a lot for me, like thinking about what it means to be Japanese in America or Japanese in Japan. And at the same time, it also was a book that I was reading sort of over and over again for various reasons, while I was having this collapse. And like, so I had to re-narrate a lot of moments that, like the actual moment that preceded my going to the hospital, like this sort of suicide attempt, and I had to revisit it like physically. Like I took the long walk through Brooklyn that I remember taking on that night, and I mean, it was painful and it was horrible, uh, but I'm glad I did it in the end because I think that I couldn't have written the book without it, and I also think that there was something kind of reparative about doing it. There was something to like reclaiming that experience that has been very meaningful to me now.
Yeah, I mean, I've had some variation of this conversation on this show many times about whether or not writing is healing. I think I just talked about it with Lydia Yuknovich a couple of weeks ago, but like I'm on the side of the line where I think it is. I think how could it not be if
Mm,
you're like slowing down and taking a careful look. You know, if you're doing the work in good faith and you're trying to be honest and you're
mhm.
trying to kind of get granular about it and slow down and look at things and maybe feel the feelings or try to understand them better in writing. If nothing else, it's like a form of deliberate processing. And when you process something on some level, it helps you release it, right? Or at least like get a better handle on it. And once you have that, then it's maybe easier to focus on other things and to kind of move in different directions. But if you don't have it and it's working on you in some kind of subterranean way, then it kind of weighs you down, right?
Yeah, I think that yeah, I agree totally with all of that. I'm sort of I'm hesitating because I think that it's like too easy, on this sort of topic of like books as healing or like books as like this simplistic kind of way to reconcile things for ourselves. I think that this sort of culture of bookishness, as the critic Jessica Pressman calls it, it sort of has led to this kind of valorization as of books as these healing objects. But healing is itself not necessarily like linear, like not a progress narrative, like not as easily done as we think it is. And so, writing is a great tool for getting through things in that it does sort of take you outside yourself. It makes you reevaluate, as you said, like to think slowly and carefully about things. But it also reminds you of what was so hard about those moments. It's not just a way to exercise things, it's a way to like get close to them, and that can be very painful. Ultimately, like with the end of like processing, as you say, but that can be like a multi-step process. I think that the narrative that we're given often is like, oh, if you just journal about this, or if you write your thoughts down, like you'll feel better, or like write a poem about how you felt, and like that'll fix everything. There's this sort of like therapeutic tinge to all of this. And I think that it sometimes is true. Like sometimes it's helpful. Sometimes it is helpful for people just to write down what happened to them. But sometimes it can make you feel worse before it makes you feel better.
Yeah, I agree. And I think there's a difference between like journaling and like no shade. Like I think journaling and just kind of writing things down as a way of like clearing out static or just like getting it, just kind of barfing it out into your notebook or whatever. I think there's some utility to that. I think it can be helpful, but I think the kind of writing that you've done in Bibliophobia where, you're trying to render the narrative for a readership, for a general readership, that forces your hand in a different way. That's a different responsibility. And I think maybe the process of writing in that mode, as opposed to writing in a journal, is that you go through revision. You
Yeah.
you you see the way in which you've been telling yourself the story and how it might be bullshit,
Mhm.
or you discover new things. Like you see things you didn't previously see. Like it can be revelatory to write like that, and maybe like in a way that's a little bit alarming, or maybe in a way that feels like ameliorating, or I don't know. There's all sorts of different effects that it can have. But uh,
Yeah, that process of having to write for someone else, like having an editor who reads everything you wrote and is like, well, this doesn't connect to that, and like, maybe there needs to be a better transition here. Like it does sort of show the loopholes in like in the stories we tell ourselves to keep going. We can have these received narratives of like how we got through certain things or how certain things happened to us. But until you really see it laid out, you don't necessarily see the flaws that you've built into it to make yourself feel better. And so there really is something to just having to sort of talk through or write through over and over again, like something that was hard for you, that has a story attached to it that maybe was not um, the truth. You thought it was, you told yourself it was because it was easier or like it was what you needed to do to get through it the first time. But in the telling, like in the repeated telling, it's become something else. And so it helps you strip back those layers and get to, what really happened, like what you really meant or what you really thought in that moment.
yeah, and I think like something that you touched upon earlier, like the ways in which I think like the culture of bookishness. Who is it? Jessica Pressman? Is that who you
Jessica
said?
Pressman. Yeah, she wrote a
Yeah.
book called Bookishness, I think. It's
Yeah,
really
but there's like I know this as well as anybody. I've probably espoused some of these sentiments myself on this show in the past, but it's like this idea of books as like a benign healing force in the world, and a way to build empathy, and to, and it can do these things. But I have to say, like when I hear people talking like that, myself included, I kind of want to, like, I get a little queasy. I'm just like, ugh. Like there's something that rings a little bit hollow about it, or false. Like, not that it's not true in some ways, but I just don't think it's the whole truth.
Yeah, I think it's, when you're trying to reach certain audiences, I think it's like really hard to avoid certain cliches or like certain ideas. Like I too have said many things about why we need books to like undergrads or to various audiences in an attempt to get them to read more that I have mixed feelings about. Sometimes it is true. You're right. Like sometimes like books do have all these qualities. Like books do heal. Like books do make us feel more empathetic. Like they can help us see these things, but that can't be an excuse just to say like, well, books only do this one thing. Books we have to see the books also do other things. Like they unsettle us, they make us uncomfortable, they scare us, and we need those experiences just as badly as we need the positive ones. Like I think that, if you only read for the good, like if you only read to feel good or to feel better, it's like not respectful of like what books actually do to us.
Yeah, they should be a little bit dangerous.
Yeah.
We need that. We need maybe more of that. We need books that really like have the power to shock and destabilize, in a good way. But you know what I'm saying? Like kind of throw us off of our foundation a little bit and make us reconsider.
Yeah, I think what we need, rather than there are plenty of books like that out there, and rather than, well, we do need more of them, but also like it's important to lift up those books and like and make ourselves sort of reckon with them. Like I think that the culture around education and reading right now is so much like, well, we just have to read things that are safe or that are coddling or that like agree with us already. And actually what we should be doing is like reading books that challenge, or challenging students to read books that challenge their ideas so that they can actually work through things rather than be kept safe or be reaffirmed.
So you wrote, I was not surprised to learn that you wrote Bibliophobia, or at least like 3 sections of it in what you call a mad rush. And,
Yeah.
2 of those sections, I think, made it into the finished product. Maybe one of them was excised or something in the
Mhm.
edit. But can you just talk about the writing process for this book? Because, again, it has this feeling of, like, being the culmination, like, and I mean this in, like, it's high praise. It just feels like one of these books that has this, like, real beautiful human urgency to it, and it's like you had something to say. And the notion that, like, after all of these years of intake, right? Like, this all of this, what was it? Vicious determination? I forget how you
Mhm.
characterized your childhood reading, but, like, just voracious reading for years and years and years and years. A lot of internalized, difficult emotional stuff that you didn't necessarily have a language for, that you were sort of holding inside, struggles with mental health, all of these different pieces. And then this monograph that you were trying to write for your academic job that was sort of torturing you and that you
Mm.
didn't want to write. And then this book begins to emerge for you. Though I think you, like, as you say, you tried to kind of avoid it in the beginning, even after you had a book deal. And then once you finally got down to it, of course it's going to, like, pour out of you, right?
Yeah, that kind of mad rush section happened before I sold the book. I wrote one essay that was I'd known that I wanted to write about the hospital, and I knew I wanted to write about the sort of feeling that we've just been talking about, that books actually are these dangerous things, like in good ways and bad ways, and books have to challenge us or have to hurt us in some ways. I knew I wanted to write about that, but I wasn't sure what form it would take. And so I wrote a few essays, and they kind of came one after the other. Like, I wrote the Morrison essay and the essay that would become the first chapter, Bibliophobia, and a third piece of the book that was with it for a long time that has sort of fallen off, that was written in the form of a letter to a friend. And I think I had not known that would be this way. There would be this sort of culmination of everything, of these memories and of all these books and of my family and my history of mental health and all of everything. I had not gone into it with the intention of making it that. I just thought that I would write about the experience that I had had in the hospital, and maybe it'd be a personal essay, or maybe it'd be just for me, or maybe it'd be something else. I don't know. Um, but I just, as soon as I started writing, like, it is sort of like you said, like, it'd been waiting to happen. Like, I'd been trying so hard to contort myself and fit this academic mold and make my writing fit a certain kind of writing. And I just couldn't do it anymore. Like, it was like, I'd been trying to fit a round peg into a square hole or whatever, like, or the opposite. I had not realized until I started writing that I should be writing this way. And it makes sense because I have this file on my computer of, like, I think it used to just be called writing, but now I think it's something else. I don't know. But it's just like these random paragraphs that I've written, like, throughout my life, like from college until the present, probably, of projects that I think I will start that might add up to something eventually. And I usually write them for about a paragraph and then lose interest or forget that I've written. There are lots of things from, like, the year 2000 that I've forgotten about that I've written about there. And looking back on all of them, I think they do all sort of add up to something like this form, like the form that the book eventually ended up taking, and also like the project itself. It's like I was trying to start it all along. I couldn't put it together in my mind.
So there's another aspect to your book that I want to talk about briefly. It's like this friendship subplot that I couldn't help but notice. You write about your friend, Merve. I have to believe that's Merve. Is it Merve
Yes, yes,
Emre?
yeah.
Okay, 'cause how many Merve I don't that's the only Merve I know of,
A
and
lot in Turkey.
yeah, a lot in Turkey, right, but, uh, kinda I don't know, I was kinda touched by it 'cause the way that you depict her in the book is that she was really there for you, like, in some of your lower moments and, like, took you in with her family. She's got young kids.
Mhm.
I just thought, like, well, there's a good friend.
I mean, she's the best friend. She's one of I'm gonna get emotional now. She's still one of my best friends. Like, she's still the person that I would go to, like, if something like that happened again. Um, Sorry. We talk, like, every day, and she's still sort of the person who, like, keeps tabs on me, like, makes sure that I'm okay. She's that person sort of intellectually and also emotionally. Like, she's the first person that I share, like, new work with, and she's also, when that happened, I there were lots of friends I did not tell about it, that I didn't talk to about it, and whether I should or shouldn't have, like, is sort of beside the point. Like, she is one of maybe 5 people who knew was happening at that time, and, she really came through. Like, she dropped everything and just came to take care of the cat when I was gone, and she's just always been there for me as the person who I can tell in an unedited way, like, what's happening. And so, yeah, I think that, I can be honest with her, like, whether and I hope everyone has a friend like that, like, someone you can truly tell, like, what is going on, like, whether it's, like, even if it's really ugly or, like, really unfortunate. And I think it's very rare to have someone like, so we also wrote a book together, with 2 other friends, Catherine Hill and Gina Richards. We wrote, a book about Elena Ferrante together, and our experience as a group of friends, like, reading Ferrante and experiencing that and writing about it together. And I think it's very rare to have someone in your life who is the first person you go to with, like, an emotional problem and also with an intellectual problem. Like, she's someone who knows sort of both sides of my life. And that's, I think, because I was an academic for so long, I felt like a lot of my friends who are not in that world, because it's very rarefied, it's, like, very specific. It's emotionally weird in ways that no one who is not an academic will understand. Everyone who is an academic will understand. Um, and I think to find someone who can sort of be on both sides of the equation, like, be know, like, what that world was like, and also know what my actual life is like, and, like, how those things do the same thing, like, how they're entwined, is, like, very rare.
Yeah, it's a lovely that's, like, one of the loveliest, sweetest parts of the book, and it made me just like you say, I wish that everyone, could have, like, such a good friend. I guess you find out that's the thing about these moments in your life where things get really dark and difficult is you sort of find out about that, and maybe not everybody has a friend like that, which is sad to say, but lucky for you, you do.
Yep. Yeah, we still talk, like, every day, and just keep each other up to date on what's going on, and, like, she she sort of keeps tabs on my mental health, and yeah, we're just very honest with each other.
So, you finish this book, and as we've mentioned more than once in this conversation, like, this book is a kind of clearing of the decks, and I think you've even described it maybe I was reading an interview you did or something, but you've kind of talked about it, I believe, as, uh, a process that is now allowing you to maybe consider other kinds of projects? Like,
Mm.
do you have another book in the works? Do you have designs on other kinds of books that you'd like to publish?
So there are two projects I have that are sort of formally still kind of like in the distance for me. Like, there's, I would like to write a long historical nonfiction book about Japanese Canadian internment in my mom's family, and
But
uh,
like the Japanese internment in the middle 20th century, you mean?
yeah, a lot of Americans don't know that it also happened in Canada, and is part of a longer history of the way the Japanese people were treated and Asians in general were treated in BC. And there's this kind of convoluted family story that relates to internment, and my grandfather ended up, he was born in Canada, but he ended up going back to Japan after his father was murdered in a log mill in BC. It's like this whole, there's this a huge drama. And so he grew up in Japan and went to war for Japan, for the Imperial Army. And my his cousins stayed in Canada and were interned. And so there's this sort of two-sided narrative, like two sides of the family being on opposite sides of the war, that I want to explore and talk about. And a sort of distant cousin, Ken Adachi, wrote a book about the history of Japanese Canadians that I'm like very interested in. And he had a he's also of personal interest to me because I had sort of thought that I was like the black sheep of the family. I thought I was the only person who was interested in literature, and it actually turns out that Ken, who died in 1989 when I was 7, he was the book critic for the Toronto Star. He was like a man of letters in Canada, and I had just never known that he existed really because, I never, I think, met him. So, and he died under circumstances I won't go into, but they were also quite dramatic and sort of sensationalized in the news at the time in Canada. And so I'd like to sort of write his story and also write the story of my grandfather and his cousins, and of our our family sort of coming to Canada, and it's exemplary in some ways of like the movement of Japanese people to British Columbia. So there's that, but that's the kind of book that you write for the rest of your life. It's like
And that's all one book? Would it be
it would all be one book. I'm sort of imagining it would be a really large historical book. I don't know. I'm afraid to. I'm sort of nervous about that project because it could take 10 years or 20 years or forever. Like who knows? So on one hand, there's that book, and it's a genre that I've not really written in before, and I don't know what it would look like. Like I think that I'd want it to retain some parts of like the way that I write, and the kinds of things I write, but I also want it to sort of tell this historical story in a more in a responsible, and I don't know, just in a way that in a mode of writing that I've not done before. So I'm thinking about that. And there's also a novel that I've been thinking about for many years. I don't. I'm gonna try it out. I'm going to residency in May, and I'm gonna try it out and see how it goes.
any hints as to what it's about, just broadly?
It's a campus novel. I have this sort of theory that every campus novel is a farce, but because academia lends itself to sort of ridiculousness in these various ways. So it's a comic campus novel.
Well, I think they both sound interesting. That family history book sounds really interesting. I think you could do it in like 436 pages. I think it
It's
could
a
be
book
done.
that I would love to read if someone else wrote
That's
it.
right. Well, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
Like
I wish someone would come along.
I was going to say, you go do all the work, and then I will be here to read it. I would be delighted to read it. But I congratulate you on Bibliophobia and all the success that you've had. And I wish you well. I hope, you sound great. I hope you're doing great. Maybe it's all a ruse, but you do, you sound well, and I hope you enjoy this moment and take good care of yourself and write more books. And I hope that you're happy.
Thanks very much, Brad. Thank you for choosing this book to highlight, and I hope that everyone does just what you've done and thinks about everything they've read, like what has ruined their lives when they read it.
Okay, folks, there we go. That's today's episode. That is my conversation with Sarah Chihaya. Her memoir is called Bibliophobia. It's available from Random House. It is the official March pick of the Otherppl Book Club. Remember, if you want to sign up for the book club, just go to the podcast's official website, otherppl.com. You can sign up there, get a new book delivered to your door every 30 days. I interview book club authors on this program, so it makes for a very enriching and holistic literary experience. If you want to find out more about Sarah Chihaya and her work, visit sarahchihaya.com. And one more time, her new memoir is called Bibliophobia. It is superb. You should read it. You'll thank me. Check it out. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen. You can also subscribe on YouTube. Follow me on social media, Instagram and Bluesky. Sign up for my newsletter over at Substack. And if you're a fan of this show, if you appreciate the work that I do, if you would like me to continue doing this work, I hope you will consider joining the Otherppl Patreon community over at patreon.com/otherpplpod. Help keep this show going into the future. If you want to get an Otherppl t-shirt or a sweatshirt, you can do that at the show's official website. Don't forget to check out my new company, Deep Dive, over at www.deepdive.audio. And if you have 2 minutes and you want to help me out, please give this show a rating wherever you listen. So Spotify, Apple Podcasts, rate this show, review this show. It helps the show find new listeners. So coming up on Thursday, I will be back with my friend and co-host Mira Gonzalez for a new episode of Brad and Mira for the Culture, our weekly review of popular culture and entertainment. Mira is a millennial, and she knows a lot about pop culture. I am a grumpy Gen X man, and I don't know nearly as much. So that's the format. That's what's happening. Check it out on Thursday, Brad and Mira for the Culture. Stay tuned.